He's got the body. I was looking at the biceps and the triceps. Like the man's arms are bigger than my thighs at this point. And after Christmas, you bet your ass those thighs are busting out of these jeans.
It's the IDP show, now you know.
Welcome to the IDP show. I'm your host, Josh Raymer, joined in the virtual Sode Shack tonight. Is one of our favorite recurring guests, Jake Kohlhagen, is in the house. We are doing a Week 17 recap, Jake, but also looking at some of our playoff champions. These are the IDPs who set the world on fire Weeks 15, 16, and 17, and probably helped win you a title. And stick around to the end of this episode because we are having the long-awaited Dynasty discussions segment where we're breaking down some of those hard to figure out Dynasty IDP assets. Jake, it's good to have you back on the show, my friend. How did your fantasy season wrap up? Did you win any titles?
It's great to be back, Josh, and it's great to say that I won two titles this year too. So 7 managed leagues, 2 titles, 4 finals appearances. So it was a really good year overall. And as we start to go through some of this list of players, there's probably going to be some recurring themes on my rosters and some of these people. Hence why I'm able to wave a couple banners here at the end of the fantasy season.
I was going to say you probably owe some of these guys fruit baskets that we're going to talk about tonight and next week as well. Tune in next week. We're going to have the annual, I think it's the 3rd or 4th annual at this point, Jake, IDP MVP episode. So we're talking about some guys tonight that really lit it up the last 3 weeks. And next week, we'll kind of wrap up the season looking back at some of the players who lit it up the entire season for you. Really fun. We're going to have probably about 20 different guests submitting their picks for IDP MVP for the 2024 season. But tonight, Jake, we are focusing on those top 10 IDPs by Big 3 scoring who really lit it up for you in the fantasy playoffs. These are the highest scoring players across all positions, and all positions are represented here. So this is a fun discussion. And like I said, at the end of the episode, we'll dive into some dynasty discussions, but we just want to give a little bit of a hat tip, some flowers to these players who played so well. And Jake, there's some guys on here that I think, independent of your scoring system, are going to show up for a lot of folks. This guy, rookie out of Green Bay, might not have been on anyone's bingo card to step up and ball out in the playoffs, but ball out he did. Edgerrin Cooper, Green Bay linebacker, was a bona fide IDP stud in the fantasy playoffs. Week 17, no different. He was the LB5 in Week 17 with 24.25 points by Big 3 scoring. And when you couple that with his 40 burger in Week 15, not one single IDP scored more points in the playoffs than Cooper did. His 26.4 points per game cleared all IDPs by at least 3.4 points per game. And of non-QB offensive players, only Brian Thomas Jr., Jahmyr Gibbs, and T. Higgins were more valuable over the playoff stretch. Jake, call Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper because a star is born in Green Bay. Hat tip, Edgerrin Cooper. What a stretch here.
Oh, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I think the even more crazy thing when you look at the numbers a little deeper behind that, right? He only played 34 and 38 snaps in Week 15 and Week 16. That Saints game was a blowout. They were pulling their starters. I mean, can you just imagine what would have happened had he been allotted an additional 20 snaps, heck, 40 snaps across those 2 games? I mean, you would have gone from winning your weeks to burying your opponent. I mean, this was just an unbelievable performance from him. You saw him do it with extreme tackle efficiency. You saw him making big plays with a sack, with an interception. Obviously, those came together in the 40 burger week. I mean, it was someone that I think everyone was very excited about. His draft capital led us to be very excited about him coming into this year. Some inconsistencies in those in front of him in the linebacker room in Green Bay led us to be a little excited. And all he did was just validate that excitement here for us weeks 15 through 17. And you know what, if you weren't trying to stash him or buy into him before the fantasy playoffs, good luck trying to pry him from the owner this offseason in dynasty leagues as you go into the next year.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Quay Walker deserved a little more love. Isaiah McDuffie is kind of sticking his nose in there. Eric Wilson seemed to be the green dot replacement for Quay Walker when Quay was out. But we had a video and an episode, Jake, earlier this season. It was the Week 15 recap. Is Cooper your edge in the fantasy playoffs? And this was coming off of that 40 burger. We said, do you want to stay in the flames? And we said, no, you really shouldn't, because this guy is just not playing. But if you did, you were richly rewarded. Edgerrin Cooper came through in a big spot. And you kind of wonder now, what does the future look like? Is it just cemented there now? It's Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper. That's where I would put my money. I don't think Eric Wilson, Isaiah McDuffie are going to keep young Mr. Cooper off the field. But another stud, let's go to the ATL and talk about Kaden Elliss. This is a name you will hear next week as well. The player who was 3.4 points per game behind Cooper across that playoff run, Kaden Elliss, 21.45 points, or 21.45 point showing, was his fifth straight game of 20 plus points since coming out of Atlanta's Week 12 bye. That is incredible. Push that 3-game playoff sample size to 5 games. Only Leonard Williams scored more points than Elliss and IDP, and no player was more consistent. Another linebacker getting it done. A name you're going to hear next week on the MVP episode. Kaden Elliss, always kind of underrated and underappreciated, came through big in the playoffs, Jake.
Absolutely. And what really shined for him was his pass rushing. And this is something for those of you who on the IDPshow.com, I was very big on Elliss last season. Coming into there, he was working with Dean Pease coming out of Atlanta. He really showcased what he had for his pass rushing chops in New Orleans, but they really didn't utilize that last year for him. And now this year, especially towards the back half of the season, they've really turned him loose, where you look from weeks 9 through 17, he was getting, 15 plus pass rush opportunities per game in 5 of those 8 weeks. And the rest of them, 6, 7, 9 pass rush opportunities. And all he did with that was convert it into 2 pressures, 3, 5, 4, 5, 4. I mean, this is exactly the upside that I saw in Kaden Elliss coming over to Atlanta and possibly being able to take over this role. I was just a year early on that, right? And hopefully those who were either in on it or was able to have him this year really enjoyed that as he turned over the last 5 weeks of the season here. He produced 4 sacks, solid tackle floor. I mean, this is like I said, this is exactly the upside we look for, especially in big 3 scoring. He delivered, and he delivered for the biggest time for fantasy owners. So what's not to love about Kaden Ellis' performance this year and in the fantasy playoffs?
Yeah, just an absolute stud. And you notice here that right out the gate, we've got 2 teams really jockeying for NFL playoff position seeding. They have something to play for. The Falcons trying to scrape and claw and get their way into the playoffs against the Buccaneers, fighting for that NFC South crown. So I think that's something to pay attention to. We saw at least my Indianapolis Colts decided not to get off the bus against the New York Giants in Week 17, and thankfully that didn't hurt Zaire Franklin. But some of these, as we get near the end of the season, especially these like Week 18 championship folks, Jake, things get really squirrely. I mean, some of these guys that you see putting up big scores, if you'd have told these names to people in Week 1, I think their heads would have exploded.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But you know what? This is why you stay tapped in to see those people that are trending towards that, are showing us that they can do and deliver those things. And it was just exciting to see these performances come through for us at the right time.
Yeah, it was like I was looking over. Shout out Addy, he did win our main league, the XFFL, and who did he have on his roster putting up close to 20 points? Jacoby Windman. And if you had told me that name as a contributor to a championship winning roster in Week 1, I'd be like, is that somebody I went to high school with? Did I work with this person previously? So yeah, it's but Kaden Elliss, LB 36 by our ADP. And I think he's going to end up finishing as a top 3 linebacker by big 3 scoring. So just a hat tip to Mr. Elliss. Great season. Hat tip to Mr. Zach Allen as well. Jake, we've made this point many times on this show that we wondered in the offseason who was going to be the Denver DL that you wanted. And we always came back to in the offseason, it's just Zach Allen. Just draft Zach Allen. That's the guy, right? Yep. Nick Bonito emerged in a big way. throughout the season. You're going to hear his name a lot next week as well on the MVP episode. But in the playoffs, who got it done was Zach Allen. Came through huge. We say league winner a lot in the context of an entire season. Championship winner, there might have been nobody bigger than Zach Allen, unless your opponent had Nick Bosa, Leonard Williams, or Mike Dana, because why not? It's week 17. It would have been hard to overcome what Zach Allen put up. 3.5 sacks, 43 points, had at least a sack and a half, wiped out on penalties in the defensive backfield. Allen averaged 22.9 points in the playoffs, more than any other defensive lineman, DT, edge, doesn't matter. He was the edge for you in the championship game. I feel like Mr. Allen probably won some titles, because if you're getting 43 points out of your defensive tackle, Jake, that is such a huge advantage.
Oh my God. It's an unbelievable advantage. And the thing is he wasn't delivering that advantage just in the fantasy playoffs for us. He did it all year long. And even when, maybe he delivered some of those underperformances in terms of the box score, you could just look and see what he was doing there. I mean, the guy had 73 pressures this year. Only one game where he had less than 4 pressures. I mean, the writing was on the wall all season for him to have a massive, blow up game like this. Obviously, the Cincinnati line is a promising way to help promote that type of blow up. But so glad he was able to do that for people in the championship week and deliver titles for everyone. But gosh, I mean, this is someone that, the IDP show guys here, we've been in on Zach Allen for some time now. I mean, he's been showing it to us, I think, since his days in Arizona. And he's just gotten a chance to really flourish that, 900 plus snaps each season the last 2 years. I mean, this guy's a freaking gold mine of fantasy points. Like, we got to hold on to that. And don't think that this is just some sort of mirage. This guy's going to be doing this for us a lot next year too.
Yeah, I think he's one of those DLs that you can count on, especially if he's labeled as a DT. It's been a pretty up and down year for defensive tackle. A lot of our stalwarts just completely fell apart this season. And you're right, this is not some flash in the pan that we have to question, like, is this legit? Is this going to continue? Like Nnamdi Madubuike coming out of nowhere to put it together. This is the third season really in a row, going, like you said, back to his Arizona days that we've seen Zach Allen do the damn thing. So I think he is a safe asset. I don't think this is a flash in the pan. Now, is he going to have this sort of performance with these kind of sack numbers every year? I mean, I think it's in his range of outcomes. I always like to fade big career sack numbers, career interception numbers, career tackle numbers, playing 100% of snaps, all of these like sort of factors that push players to the top of the mountain. I always want to try to cash out on that. Like if you'd cashed out on Bobby Okereke, Antoine Winfield last year, you're feeling pretty good. It's just hard to stay at that kind of high heights year in and year out. But I think Zach Allen is a guy probably be disrespected, probably be underdrafted next offseason. So I think he's a guy that will be a value for us again in 2025. A guy that, will he be a value? I don't know, because I think he's quickly establishing himself as one of the premier defensive backs. Forget just safety, cornerback, just defensive backs. It's Brian Branch. Ryan Branch missed weeks 4 and 5 through injury and a bye week. And yet, through week 7, there was no player hotter or more consistent than this guy. And then, as is bound to happen, Jake, regression struck and he went cold. Then he reignited in week 15 and stayed in the flames through the whole playoffs. With his 18-point game on Monday night, was the highest scoring DB in the playoffs and the 5th highest scoring IDP in that stretch, 21.8 points per game. There are few players I think we're going to discuss on this episode, Jake, or the next episode, the MVP episode, that I would say are as good an NFL player as Brian Branch is. Truly a difference maker for one of the best teams in the NFL.
And I mean, it couldn't come at a better time in terms of what Detroit suffered in terms of all their injuries that they've had to try and manage through. And what really the big thing for me coming into this year was, he's going to go into this role where he's playing a little bit more deep safety, right? He's coming out of that slot defender role where he was so productive last year. And like you talked about, he still found ways to be one of the best IDP assets for us in the first half of that season. Made plays, multiple interceptions, still racking up plenty of tackles. But when we needed him most, and when Detroit needed him most, what did they do? They shifted him back into that slot defender role. And what did he do over that span over these playoffs? Nearly 30 tackles, getting into the backfield, causing pressures, getting a sack in that final week 17 game, right? I mean, all season up to that point, he had no more than 2 or 3 pass rush attempts a game. He averaged 5.5 over the last 2 weeks, right? I mean, they knew they had a playmaker. They knew they needed him to make the plays for them because everyone else was off the field at that point in terms of key deliverers for their defense. And he did it for us. So, yeah, I mean, the value is going to be sky high for him coming up into this offseason. He's a for sure hold. I know, and like you talked about, you love to sell high, but this is someone who they find a way to put him into play and make those plays. I'm not going to make the one-to-one comparison, but he's definitely going into that stratosphere of, the Troy Palomalus, right? Where this guy is going to just make plays one way or another on the field. And yeah, I'm here for the ride. I love it, every moment of it with Brian Branch.
Yeah, and I should clarify here. Sell high means sell high. It means go get second, a first round pick, a future first. Like, do not cash out on any of these elite assets that we're talking about in IDP for anything less than a king's ransom.
Yes.
And then know that you can go find that kind of production from somebody like, a Dane Belton, who we're going to talk about here in just a minute, right? Like a Jacoby Windman. I mean, linebacker especially, you could find those guys on the waiver wire every single season. So don't just sell to sell. Don't flip these guys just for S's and G's. Like, go out and get you a nice return that you can then turn into an asset that's going to hold even more value and even more upside and scoring potential for your lineups. One of those rookie running backs that pops, take that second or third round rookie pick that was Bucky Irving and go win you a title with somebody like that. So that is what we're talking about here. And we'll talk about it more in the Dynasty discussion segment as well. But don't just sell to sell. And with Brian Branch, you're going to have to pry him out of my cold, dead hands because this dude is a stud. A stud for the Indianapolis Colts, even if he needs to stop yapping on his podcast about beating the 4-11 Giants and then getting dog walked by the team with the number 1 overall pick in week 17. The team, Jake, did not get off the bus. I'm convinced. You look at some of the effort, especially from some of the DBs, it was just putrid. Those guys clearly did not want to be there. They wanted the season to be over. Bad times in Indy, but not bad times if you had Zaire Franklin on your IDP squad. He was the leading IDP linebacker, tied with Big Bob Spillane for the week. His 14 tackles kept him atop the NFL leaderboard and have him beating his previous best ever IDP year of 16.01 points per game in 2022, as he's currently at 16.63 points per game. If Jake, has a good week in week 18, he will surpass that incredible 2022 season we saw from him. Not only that, he was elite when you needed it. Franklin was the third best linebacker to have in the playoffs. His 21 points per game scored through weeks 15 through 17 was only behind, as we mentioned, Kaden Elliss, Edgerrin Cooper. One of the themes that I like to see woven here, doing these 2 episodes back to back, Jake, is players mentioned on the MVP episode who are mentioned here as playoff champions, right? Because there's a lot of guys like our Andrew Van Ginkels, right, that are incredible, definitely worthy of being MVP. We don't see them here on this list. So it's nice when guys that performed for you all year show up in the playoffs, because the mantra so many times is start your studs, trust the guys that got you there. As Bobby likes to say, dance with the girl you brought. And so Zaire Franklin, you had him out on the dance floor. You're making some sweet, sweet music.
Yeah, I mean, if you got Zaire Franklin out there and that's your date, I mean, you're doing well, man, because I mean, he's been doing this for us for the last 3 years now. I mean, you talked about how tremendous 2022 was. 2023 was a quote unquote down year where he still racked up 170 plus tackles. I mean, the guy is a machine out there. And I'm interested to see what happens in the offseason. I know we'll get into it later with some of the conversations with how poorly the defense has played and what that means going forward. But, gosh darn it, if Zaire Franklin you expected a lot from him. You paid up for him, especially like in best ball drafts or redrafts. If you're a dynasty and you've been in on him for a while, you're holding on to him and you're loving every minute of it because that's all this guy does is consistently deliver. And, the only thing I can really say about this is it just takes me back to to the end of the year last year discussions that you see in some of the Twitter sphere X and people talking about how EJ Speed is the guy to have, right? And Franklin's washed and he can't keep this up. And it's like, look at this body of work and tell me this isn't just an elite IDP asset, even here at, what is he, 20, almost, he's going to be 29 years old next season for his playing age. Like, the guy is great for a reason. Again, just sit back and enjoy it and appreciate the fact that he took you on a wild ride through the playoffs here to, again, hopefully we're talking to a lot of people that got some IDP titles from listening to this show.
Yeah. Zaire Franklin will be there in Indy, out in his contract in 2026, but dead money outweighs the cap hit for 2025. I think he'll be there, named to the Pro Bowl. Yeah, sort of a bad taste in your mouth with how the season ended and his comments on the podcast with EJ Speed. So it's a little bit of a stink, but Zaire Franklin has played well. I think he'll play out at least that next year of his contract there in Indy. And like we said, he's 29 years old. It's not like he's, pushing mid-30s or something like a Demario Davis out there. So now we did see Shaq Leonard fall off a cliff unexpectedly, but he was also derailed by injuries. And that was kind of my note with Zaire Franklin at the end of last season was, yes, EJ Speed did outplay Zaire Franklin. At times he did outsnap Zaire Franklin. Zaire Franklin was also hurt at the end of last season. That was the reason you saw the dip. And my thinking was, yes, I think EJ Speed is still going to eat. I think Zaire Franklin is also going to eat.
Yes.
I think I said top 6 for Zaire before the season, just because Gus Bradley always rolls out 2 linebackers. And as long as Zaire Franklin is healthy, he's going to be racking up tackles. And that's exactly what he did. 100% of snaps this year for Zaire Franklin. So tip of the cap to really the only Colt that I can proudly claim after week 17. Let's move on, though, to the Atlanta Falcons. We mentioned Kaden Elliss. Let's talk about his teammate, Jessie Bates, the DB2, safety 2, 20.9 points per game during the playoffs. Thanks to his 12 tackle, 22.6 point game against Washington, only one DB was better asset to have in the playoffs than Jessie Bates. His 20.9 points per game through the fantasy playoffs had him as the 6th best overall IDP asset in that span. And while his 2024 campaign at 13.08 points per game didn't match his 2023 run of 15.4 points per game, he was still there when you needed it most. Jessie Bates was an easy fade, Jake, coming off of that ridiculous season he had in 2023 with all those interceptions. But with all that said, 13.08 points per game. Nothing to sneeze at. Definitely overdrafted. Like, don't get me wrong, like overdrafted for the production, but another stud that showed up for you big when you needed it most.
Absolutely. And it was a little bit of a fun ride here, a roller coaster ride, maybe for Jessie Bates for the season too, that led us to the fantasy playoffs. We saw him play a real nice number inside the box and into defensive line and in the slot there for the first half of the season. We saw his tackle numbers look really nice for us and give us a solid floor. He was able to deliver a couple interceptions in the first half of the season. And so you thought, okay, this is something we're really going to appreciate. The value we spent is there. Well, then he really kind of disappeared in the second half of the year. And what had happened? Well, he started to play less inside the box. He got 10 snap games inside the box, 19, 6, 13 snaps. But when it mattered the most for us in weeks 15 and 16, tackle numbers weren't there because of the box production alignment really wasn't there either. He found a way to deliver 2 big interceptions. And then obviously in that final week 17, we talked about an amazing performance where he racked up all those tackles, where he played one of his best totals in terms of his amount inside the slot, inside the box. And what did he do? He delivered for us.
Yeah, Jessie Bates, DB, it's pretty common to say fade DB, which again, I think is a sound strategy. You don't want to overinvest in defensive back. We've seen this. Go read DJ Keltown's articles if you want to see exactly what that looks like in terms of kind of ROI for that draft pick. But I will say, these two DBs were the DB6 safety 4 in Jessie Bates, and Brian Branch was the DB5 cornerback 2. So two of the most highly drafted DBs also were two of the guys that showed up big for you in the playoffs. So Jake, on IDP drafts, it's going to be returning this offseason. We're going to be talking a lot about draft strategy. And I think the fade DB strategy is the way to go. Kind of in the aggregate, like I want most of my builds to be fade DB, but I think there is a strategy that makes sense. Whereas if you can nail those DB selections, going early DB, grabbing one kind of anchor stud, not a bad strategy because we saw those guys come through big for managers here at the end of the season.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's exactly, you kind of nailed it or getting to the point there, right? Where, if everyone's going linebacker heavy and all of a sudden you're sitting there and, whatever it is, the 4th, 5th, 6th round, and you're staring down some of these stud DBs who, yes, again, we don't want to overpay for them in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, but if they're falling to you got to take that. And then you just kind of adjust your roster construction from there. Because then once you have that, a stud DB locked in there, now you can really punt that position and you can build all kinds of depth, at your linebacker and your defensive lines spots. You can target, if it's a sleeper platform where we do a lot of them, you can target that dual designation where you can really build out either even further depth or rotational pieces there in terms of what can get slotted in a best ball. And it's you got to take it if it's there, because this is exactly what these guys can do. They're studs for a reason, for fantasy and on the NFL field. And you just have to be aware of that. So if that opportunity is presented to you, you can make the wise and informed decision to, again, zig when others are zigging.
Yeah, and there's the cheat code here as well for those of you, our fellow degenerates, paying attention here at the end of the season after the championships have been played and Week 18 is getting ready to kick off. This is where you gain an edge, because looking at those, late season, kind of we're going to talk splits on one of our next upcoming episodes. Myself, Adam, and Bobby are going to look at start of the season splits, which is where a lot of people anchor down their perception of a player is based on the first half of the season splits. But where you gain an edge is paying attention to those late season splits. Who really surged in the back half of the season? Who delivered for you most recently? Because that's what we've seen most recently on the field, is that back half of the season. And so paying attention to guys that surge down the stretch and not just checking out with your perception of a player at Halloween. It's a big cheat code. One of the biggest cheat codes in all of fantasy football is just staying locked in, staying plugged in, paying attention through the end of the season to see what happens and the developments. I think if you had done that, you would have seen and we hope we see this player get on the field, but Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, you could have seen that coming from a mile away if you had paid attention at the end of last season. So we'll see what your boy Christian Harris does. That was a guy I was really high on. Had the weirdest IR stretch I think I've ever seen this season, but still have high hopes for the young man. Loved what Christian Harris did near the end of last season. So let's keep it rolling though, Jake, and talk about another player, just a stud. Just a locked and loaded. I think when we did the math, he was DL4 or something like that over the last few seasons on average. So it's Myles Garrett, Cleveland Browns. Cleveland, they stink. They have really nothing to play for other than draft position. But Myles Garrett, I think he's angling for that Defensive Player of the Year crown. And he's also a man of the people, Jake. He is a man of the fantasy people. Week 17, I think he knows fantasy championships are on the line for IDP managers, because he is averaging 24.16 points per game in Week 17 games since 2022. His 20.8 points per game led all edges in the 2024 playoffs, and trailed only Zach Allen. If you played in a combined DL league like Sleeper, 2024 was Garrett's fourth straight season with 14 or more sacks. Somehow that doesn't feel like living on name value alone. Jake, Myles Garrett has the name value. He's got the body. I was looking at the biceps and the triceps. Like the man's arms are bigger than my thighs at this point. And after Christmas, you bet your ass those thighs are busting out of these jeans. But my man is still looking like a Hercules doll out there, getting it done for fantasy managers. Take a bow, Myles Garrett. The dude is a stud.
I mean, I wish I could tell you there's some magic, number or analysis on Myles Garrett, but I think you just nailed it. I mean, the guy is just a legitimate stud. He is elite. He always has been. He probably will continue to be for several years yet. I don't see any slowdown in his game out there. I mean, we look at the fantasy playoffs if we're box score hunting, right? Well, week 15, he didn't deliver a sack for us, right? But you know what he did do? 12 total pressures, 9 hurries, 3 quarterback hits. The guy's there. He's doing everything he needs to do. Unfortunately, sacks can be very much like on the offensive side, the touchdowns that they just don't always come. But you know what? When you have elite production and analysis or analytical numbers to present what you are doing is working on the NFL field, like 12 pressures and 9 hurries and 3 quarterback hits in a single game, well, then you get 3 sacks over the next 2 games, especially in week 17 championship. And you can lean into that and you can trust that those things are going to come. Sometimes you just got to deal with the down week and hope you survive. But the highs are going to be high with Myles Garrett. And if we didn't already know that, well, it was just reinforced here in week 17.
Yeah, Myles Garrett, what a stud. Jeff Pomazal brought it up on the IDP update this week that Myles Garrett, maybe trade candidate in the offseason. He's already kind of expressed his desire to see what this team is going to do at quarterback. I can't say I blame him. He doesn't want to be around for a rebuild. I wouldn't either. Now, I don't think there's any world in which Cleveland puts this guy on the trade block. Might they privately shop him? Possibly, because I think the idea is if you can go get, say, a first round pick or a first plus, 2 first round picks, maybe a 2025 first and a 2026 first or something like that for Myles Garrett, then you can start to restock the pantry after the Deshaun Watson debacle. That's the only world in which that makes sense to me, like a full tear down rebuild. But Myles Garrett's just one of those players. I don't care if I'm 1-16 or 16-1. I want a guy like that on my team. So let's move on to the aforementioned safety. Dane Belton was a hell of a replacement, Jake. I mean, this was a situation where we were a little bit spoiled there with the New York Giants, and injuries, they happen, right? We saw it with the linebackers as well. Bobby Okereke goes down. You had Micah McFadden go down. So who is it? It's Darius Masau and the other guy. I can't even remember his name now. I mean, we're down to that like LB 6-7 on the depth chart at this point. But I do know Ty Summers. There it was. He was on the IDP update as well. Jeff was shouting him out as a potential start. So it's the time of year where you got to pay attention. Dane Belton, one of the guys that we called out, Tyler Nubin off to IR, waiver wire gem. That was Dane Belton, became a playoff champion for you. Now, he crushed it for you in week 15, even a little bit of a down week, 8+ points. Still nothing to sneeze at from the DB position. But when it mattered most, in title week, he had his first interception in 2024, plus 8 tackles. So, this is a guy that's going to be remembered fondly, Jake. I think as much as we love when our studs like Zaire Franklin and Myles Garrett show up and show out, it's these waiver wire darlings that we snatch up off of waivers and can plug right into our lineups and get production from. Those are the unsung heroes. And I think we feel all warm and fuzzy about these guys years later, thinking back about Dane Belton helped me win a championship in 2024. What a guy.
And I can say those exact words. He was in 3 of my fantasy finals lineups, and I got to enjoy those. I sincerely miss the fact that it was at the expense of Tyler Nubin, who was off to such an amazing start to his career. And we really hope to see that pick up here for him in his sophomore season. But gosh, paying attention to how they were using Tyler Nubin. I mean, he was living in the box, right? He was that third linebacker for the Giants so many times, and Dane Belton just stepped right in. And we saw that with, like you talked about, the week 15 performance, 13 plus tackles. He notched a sack in there. He's getting some pass rush opportunities. And then again, a little bit of dip in the numbers, but still a decent floor for you in week 16. And God, again, just, pass rush opportunities. He didn't convert it into a sack, but he had a hurry. He had the pressure. He had the tackles. And then, of course, because it's week 17 and what a story it was, he put the cherry on top with the interception. So Dane Belton is a great name to hold on to for those championship stories. But like you said, the lesson learned is the bigger thing, right? We want to keep with us forever as well. That, you talked exactly about, hey, let's fade some DBs here. Well, this is exactly why, right? Because they, not to shade anything they do on an NFL field, but for fantasy production, they're very, very easy to replace with, a click of the button on the waiver wire or free agency. And that's why we got to remember that, but you got to stay tapped in to understand which are the ones we got to be pulling into our roster here in clutch time. And then you get to have the fun stories of Dane Belton championships.
Well, and you look at guys that are just stepping into primo situations, right? I mean, that was kind of the story of a lot of these injury replacements are just guys that are stepping into good situations. There's not often sort of one-for-one replacements for certain guys, right? You're not going to go grab Myles Garrett's replacement and stick him in there unless you're really desperate, unless you're in like a start 4 or 5 DL kind of league, then maybe you can roll that guy out there. But probably even then, no. But linebackers, certain safety positions, depending on the scheme, like the Gus Bradley scheme, we're going to talk about a little bit later, so profitable for safeties, right? Because he loves utilizing these box safeties. That's why Nick Cross, at one point, I think, was leading the NFL in tackles. And so there are just certain roles, certain types of positions that lend themselves well to injury replacements. And Dane Belton definitely benefited from that, stepping into Tyler Nubin's shoes when Nubin went to IR. Let's talk about a player, Jake, who his replacement gets a lot of love. One of the, I would say, most beloved players in all of IDP, Ivan Pace Jr., stepped in for an injured Blake Cashman. When Cashman went on the shelf, Minnesota had their bye in week 6, but week 7, 8, and 9, Blake Cashman was out. And to start the season, my man was the very definition of boom bust. 6.5 points in week 1, then 34.85 in week 2, 4 points, in week 3, 22.25 in week 4, 11.25, then gets injured, but comes back from injury and rattles off a log: 21, 15, 8, 12, 17, 14, 20, and 26 points, Jake. Blake Cashman was straight cash money. Very likely propelled you to a fantasy title, just like Zach Allen with his 11 tackles and 1.5 sacks, 20.3 points per game, top 4 scoring linebacker in the entire playoff period. I mean, Blake Cashman, you all did the week 17 Sunday morning live stream, you and Jeff. Y'all probably had some Blake Cashman questions, didn't you?
Yeah, there definitely was. And, I was definitely comfortable leaning into him at that point. I mean, he showed us exactly what he can do. You talked about, he came back from injury and, what did he do? He started getting some pressures and he started turning those pressures into sacks. He had sacks both week 10, week 11 coming back. And then they really ratcheted that up, especially Brian Flores, right? Like with Ivan Pace out during those times. I know he came back in, the last couple of weeks here, but without him, Blake Cashman was just feasting as a pass rusher, right? From weeks 13 through 17, he had at least 15 pass rush opportunities every single week. He generated pressures every single week. Unfortunately, it didn't translate into sacks during some of that stretch there, 12, 13, 14, 15. But come championship week, when it mattered the most for us, 2 sacks there, and delivering nearly 10 plus tackles. on average across a lot of these games here too. I mean, the guy had the floor, he had the upside, and a Brian Flores scheme is one to profit in, especially for some of these athletic linebackers like Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace. So you love to see it. This is a Madden darling of mine too. I would always take him on Madden because he was so fast. And then now we're seeing it translate for the NFL as well over the last 2 seasons here. So love to see Cashman making a name for himself here.
Yeah, it's awesome. We love Ivan Pace Jr., right? His little T-Rex arms. We love this dude. He's awesome. Like, he's a pocket-sized playmaker. But Blake Cashman, you know this, right? Houston Texans had stretches last year where he was phenomenal for you guys. And it was fun to see him finally get his opportunity to anchor a defense. I got a little bit worried when he was out and Pace was playing so well. I thought, okay, what's this going to look like coming back? But Cashman came right back, resumed that full-time role. Brian Flores loves this guy. This Vikings team is a Super Bowl contender, and Blake Cashman is a big part of the reason why. Another Super Bowl contender, you could argue the Super Bowl favorite. I think we're just marching towards another Chiefs Super Bowl win, and there's nothing we can do about it. I think we're marching toward a Travis Kelce proposal and retirement at the Super Bowl as the confetti's fallen post-game. Yeah, I'm going to be just sick to my stomach at that point. But Trent McDuffie, Jake, I know this is one of your favorite guys, especially at DB, and Mr. McDuffie came up big. He was a little bit down in championship weeks, 13 points, but he was still a league winner, 20.25 points per game in the playoffs, number 1 for all CBs, thanks to 13 tackles, 5 PDs, 2 picks, and a forced fumble. Another player who came up clutch when you needed it most. The floor is yours, sir. Please opine about Mr. McDuffie all you would like.
Yeah, and again, right, we talked about some of these rosters having them. These are some of my rosters here with Trent McDuffie. I was big on him coming out of college. It's hard to get super excited about cornerbacks, but I just like the athleticism that he showed as a playmaker. And then, his rookie year, he really got a chance to move into that slot role with in the second half of the year with L'Jarius Sneed playing outside. And then he got a chance to be the full-time slot guy or the primary slot guy. And he just feasted last season. Well, now this year, he ended up playing more outside, right? L'Jarius Sneed leaves. And, we see some of his numbers drop throughout the season, right? He doesn't have nearly as many big plays throughout the season, especially, making plays in the backfield, those tackles for loss, the sacks for the big plays. Really, really kind of fell off this year. And you saw in that middle part of the year, he probably played, it looks like a combined 15 slot snaps. Well, guess what happened here in the championship weeks or the playoff weeks? He started to play more in that slot role again. And what happened for us? He started to produce those big plays again. And that's exactly what we love to see for him. That's where we love to see him just wreak havoc on the opposing offense. For IDP purposes, I would love to see the Chiefs go and get an outside lockdown corner in the draft this year. Plenty of defensive talent for the 2025 NFL draft on the defensive side. And if they could slide him back into that slot defender role, my goodness, wheels up for Trent McDuffie again.
That's where he plays best, man. Like, yes. I think, Spagnuolo, for all his evil that he, throws at IDP managers every single season, the man knows what he's doing. Andy Reid knows what he's doing. And I think they know what they have in McDuffie. It's interesting when it matters the most, when this team is trying to secure a first round bye and give themselves like 2 or 3 weeks off. What happens? They get Trent McDuffie back in the slot. So I'm with you. Let's get an lockdown outside corner for the Kansas City Chiefs and put McDuffie in the slot and keep him there. And if that happens, Jake, I'm with you. Wheels up. That could be a top 10 DB pick in drafts if he gets that kind of role. If we know for sure, they just took this outside corner, this is the guy, and this signals a move to the slot for McDuffie, just arrow up. That's going to be a big time stock up for a player that I think a lot of folks already like a lot. I mean, this was the DB22 CB5 by our ADP. So no slouch, but I think you could see those numbers tick up if we know for sure he's going to have this profitable role. So those were your playoff champions, and tip of the cap to all of the IDPs who helped us bring home the titles this year. Who was your playoff champion? Who was that guy you picked up off waivers, or that stud that you rode clear through the season into the playoffs and all the way to a title? If you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comments. Let us know. If you're listening to the audio pod, hit us up on Twitter at the IDP show and let us know who was your playoff champion. Jake, let's wrap things up with some dynasty discussions. We have been eliciting questions, players, situations, comments from folks over the last few weeks. We've been putting this off, and tonight we are finally having the dynasty discussion. We have about 10 different players, situations here that we want to go through and kind of give our thoughts on, because the fantasy season for most folks is wrapped up. Dynasty off season is about to kick off in earnest. And so these are the conversations. These are the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves about these Dynasty IDP assets. It's a good bunch, Jake. We're going to whip through these. What do you say we jump right into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's kick things off with a great name. Great name for a player. I mean, let's just put that out there. Josh Hines-Allen, topic of much consternation this season. Jake, a big letdown. You could see this coming, right? Khalil Mack, Nnamdi Madubuike, Josh Allen, these big sack artists from 2023. Always fade that stuff, guys. This, to me, Jake, what do we do with Josh Hines-Allen? He's like rich man's Rashawn Gary to me, because we have seen a ceiling outcome for Hines-Allen that we have not yet seen for Rashawn Gary. And it feels like this is possible, but it's a lot of times you're left with blue balls when it comes to Josh Hines-Allen. And so I think, see if you can go trade Hines-Allen for his teammate Travon Walker. Addy has officially flipped those two in his dynasty rankings. But Jake, what are you doing with Josh Hines-Allen in dynasty?
Yeah, I think this is the right time to sell, right? I mean, he's still 63 pressures, 9 sacks on, 821 snaps through 17 weeks. So, he's still got value out there for a person's roster. It's just, a lot of people are holding on to last year, right? 90 pressures, massive sack numbers. That's not something that he's going to consistently produce for us, because he's shown us who he is, right? I think, that 9, 10, 11 sack range, that's exactly what he's going to give you. But, holding out and really planning on him to give you anything more than that is kind of a fool's errand. And I think, the Travon Walker thing is a beautiful call out, right? Especially if you can go, hey, can I get, can we swap these guys and I get a third, on top of that? I mean, that's massive profit in my opinion. And then at that point, this is exactly what they said about Travon Walker coming out in the NFL draft. They said this guy is a raw talent, right? His footwork needs a lot of improvement. His bag only has a few set of tools in it. And you've seen those things progress appropriately now over the last 2 years. And with that said, this is exactly what you need to see to have that confidence to go make that kind of move. Because I think the most likely scenario is next year, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get 40 tackles. You're going to get 10 sacks from Josh Hines-Allen. And again, you're not going to be, distraught by that performance, but there's a lot more to be had out there. And the namesake can definitely still bring that value for you at this point.
Yeah, I think for me, it's not just like this guy sucks, like get him off my team. I want to see if I can capitalize on the name value. And I don't think the market has flipped yet on Hines-Allen versus Travon Walker. And this is not a huge gap. Adam has him as edge 13 for Walker versus edge 15 for Hines-Allen. They're 29, 30, and 31 overall on his list of dynasty rankings. So not a huge gap, but I think the market has these guys much further apart. So I'm with you, right, Jake. If I can turn Hines-Allen into Travon plus, that's the move right there. I'd rather chase the upside with Travon than the frustration with Hines-Allen. And I'll take that 3rd round pick and turn that into an edge rusher in next year's draft class. So I'm with you on Hines-Allen. Let's move to another edge rusher though, Nick Bosa. Jake, I think this is one of the all-time buy low moments, because not often you can buy low on a guy that has 16, 17, 18 sack upside like Nick Bosa. And this was a down year for Nick Bosa. It's also just a nightmare season for the 49ers. Sometimes we just have to forgive and forget and kind of put these things aside. I think this 49ers team will be back in the mix, pushing for the playoffs. I think Nick Bosa, all of these are with the caveat of health, right? Like if these guys can still, but let's just assume in a nice little optimistic, happy world that these guys do stay healthy. This is a top 5 edge rusher. And so if you can go get this guy for anything less than a first round pick, I think I'm pushing the button on that. One of the things that I love in Adam's Dynasty rankings is he has the trade value. He has Nick Bosa valued at a late first right now. So I'll go offer 204 for Nick Bosa. Now I may get laughed at. Maybe I throw in a, second or third round pick next year or something. But if you can go get this guy for anything less than a late first, I'm going to see if I can do that, Jake.
Yeah. And just the fun tie-in, right? We just talked about these top fantasy performers, right? What did Bosa do for us in week 17? Huge game. And I actually was thankfully able to profit from that because I bought him last year for a first. And I did, have to experience some of the quote unquote down year here from Nick Bosa. But you know what? We just talked about Josh Hines-Allen, right? He had 63 pressures and 9 sacks on the season. That was on like 850 snaps. Now you turn around and look at Nick Bosa, who on nearly 150, 170 less snaps is able to produce just a little bit more in pressures and sacks at 67 and 10. Maybe you take Josh Hines-Allen and you add a second to him, and now you're sitting with Nick Bosa, right? Because again, maybe the owner's like, oh, bad year, the Niners are trending down, whatever it is. If you can buy that dip, however slight it is, this is the time to go do it because the guy's only 27 years old. He's going to be he's not even going to be 28 at the start of next year's NFL season. The guy has consistently played 900 plus snaps. You talked about the sack performances. This happens, right? And I don't think there's any reason for concern. I think this is just, people have down years in terms of playing time sometimes. I have no hesitation to go out and buy Nick Bosa, even if it comes close to his normal price prior to this, right? But if you can get even a slight discount, it's fully worth it.
Yeah, only 13 games. He missed weeks 12, 13, and 14, and they had their bye in week 9. But you look at the sacks, Jake. I mean, it was in 2021, 15.5, 2022, 18.5. Last year, just 10.5, and then 9 this year. Now you could say, oh, this guy's been trending down for 2 seasons. What are you guys talking about? No, this is a guy who is an elite asset. And you know what I love, Jake, is that even though the sacks are down, what has stayed consistent is the tackles. Yes. You look at this guy's tackle output the past 4 years, 52, 51, 53, 52 in just 13 games for Nick Bosa. So even though the sacks haven't been there, quote unquote, and like you put here in the notes, you have 10 sacks in a down season for Nick Bosa. I mean, it's just insane, the standard that we're holding this guy to. So, maybe see if your league mate who rosters Nick Bosa is like, man, if he throws him out there on the trade block, kind of angry, like, come get these guys, see if you can sneak in there and get him for a second round pick. Well, let's move on. We can hit this one quickly here, Jake. Sidney Brown. I roster Sidney Brown in our main league, the XFFL. And the question was, what about versus the 2024 rookie safety class? Kalen Bullock, Tyler Nubin, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Cole Bishop, Jaden Hicks, some of these other options. I think Sidney Brown is a fine, deep bench stash if you have the room, Jake. I would cut him loose if I could, if he wasn't under contract for me. I don't want to eat the dead cap. And we did see enough from Sidney Brown last season to say, I'm interested. This is a good team, good draft pedigree. This was coming off a week 16 or 17 ACL tear for Sidney Brown. So give him this year, mulligan. Let's just punt this. But I think I would still rather have guys from the 2024 class like Tyler Nubin, Cole Bishop, even Jaden Hicks, who I think they could be teeing up as like a Justin Reed replacement there in Kansas City. So not totally out on Sidney Brown. If you can sell him for something, if you've got the room, not crazy about Brown, but not totally out either.
Yeah, I think you laid out the situation perfectly. I was huge, very high on Sidney Brown coming in. He finally got a chance at the end of this, the season 2 years ago. He had, a 100-yard pick six the week before he got hurt. I mean, the guy was starting to showcase what he could potentially be for that Philadelphia Eagles secondary. Injury shortened that. The injury also required them to attack that secondary still again in the offseason. Then you see Cooper DeJean come in, right? And someone like Sidney Brown, the way he played coming out of college, I thought he could be someone that could be versatile enough to slide into that slot defender role. He could play down in the box. He could play deep, right? And that versatility was going to get him on the field, give him the opportunity, put him into high value situations for us. But now that secondary looks a lot different than it did 2 years ago when he came in. So I have hesitations about can he sustain that value or have long-term value there. I'm willing to give it one more year because that Eagles secondary is older outside of DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, but I'm definitely not as high as I used to be. That's for sure. And yeah, and Newman obviously is a clear cut above right now and trending the right way. Cole Bishop's shown a lot here at the second half of the season. I do like Jaden Hicks. This is probably some of my bias showing through here. I do like Kalen Bullock. He's shown he can be a strong playmaker on the back of that secondary. So his alignment is not ideal for us in terms of consistent production. But when you start talking best ball strategies or other things like that, or even deeper rosters, Kalen Bullock is definitely someone I'm going to have ahead of Sidney Brown at this point, just because the trajectory for him is looking very positive in that Texans secondary as well. So, yeah, I think you laid it out perfectly. It's a shame to see such a promising start derailed due to injury, though.
Yeah, and it's important to note here the competition, right, for snaps, because you look at the fact that both CJ Gardner-Johnson under contract, don't have an out until after next season in his contract, and then Reed Blankenship. The dead cap would outweigh the cap hit if the Eagles decided to move on. Now they could. It'd only be eating like $1 million or so. But I always like to look at those situations where could he be walking into more opportunity because of who's walking out the door? That doesn't seem to be the case there. So tepid optimism with Sidney Brown. Next up, we had a question wondering if I stick with Cam Hayward at DL or bring in a potential higher upside play like Ed Oliver or Chop Robinson, Danielle Hunter, already in the other D-line slot. I like Chop Robinson the best of this group in a dynasty league, Jake. Chop was delicious down the stretch here. Came on. We say with rookie edge rushers, we just want to see some flash. We want to see some sizzle. And he delivered both. And I'm very excited about the future there for Chop Robinson. Unfortunately, it comes at the expense of a guy we'll talk about here at the end of the dynasty discussions. And Bradley Chubb ain't getting any younger either. No matter what happens in Miami, I think Chop Robinson is a player you want to have. I think he's got some nice little upside there, Jake.
Oh, absolutely. I think, he leaves something to be desired in terms of what he can do in run defense yet at this point in time. But like you talked about, this guy is very young, very raw, right? I mean, I know we've seen a lot of older rookies coming out lately. He's still 22 years old going up against, these grown ass men on the other side of the line. And what he's been able to show still in that limited time. I mean, you're talking 524 snaps, 322 of those as pass rush, but he still generated 52 pressures along that time. I mean, that's the type of stuff we like to see from veteran pass rushers, right? That we're excited about and are consistent for us. He's doing this as a rookie, and he posted a 78.6 pass rush grade as a rookie. Like, I don't think we can stress that enough. Like, this guy's trajectory is just potentially through the roof. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to go out there and say he's the next Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, whatever. But I mean, the way he started out, how it can't be anything but excitement for this guy going forward. Bradley Chubb, love you. The fact that they did not bring him back at the end of the season while they are still technically in playoff contention, I think that tells me everything I need to know about where he's at and at that age and where he could be. And Jaelan Phillips, who we'll get to in a little bit. I mean, this guy is setting up to be the number one pass rusher there. And if Phillips can come back or Chubb can be rotational and or both, I mean, it only wheels up even further for Chop. So if you have an opportunity to go get him, I'm willing to pay, upwards of a mid-second for this guy because I just think the future's that bright.
Yeah. Adam has the value at his second and is his edge 19. Not only did they not bring back Bradley Chubb, but they didn't bring back Shaq Barrett either.
Barrett, yep.
Had a chance to bring him off the reserve retired list and no thank you. Cut him loose. He ends up signing in Tampa Bay. So we may get to see Shaq Barrett yet in week 18 or the playoffs. But yeah, Chop Robinson, super impressive rookie season. I mean, I think you could make the case he was the second most impressive rookie edge behind Jared Verse. who has vaulted himself into top 6, top 7, top 8 Dynasty Edge consideration. So let's keep it rolling though, Jake. EJ Speed versus Jordyn Brooks. And why? This is a juicy one. And as much as I loved EJ Speed coming into the season, I think this is pretty clearly Jordyn Brooks, not just for what we saw, how he outperformed Speed in 2024, but also the fact he signed long-term there in Miami. They do have an out in his contract, so he could be cut this offseason, save a little bit of money. But after how well Jordyn Brooks played for Miami, I think this is a guy they'll want to keep around there because ain't a lot else happening in that linebacker room. I know we're happy, we like Tyrell Dodson and all that. Feel good story with him coming in for, who was it? The journeyman there that landed from Cleveland. Was it Hicks or who was the guy that was there in Miami?
Anthony Walker.
Anthony Walker. Thank you. I knew it was one of those like flavor of the week Jag guys, but yes, Dodson, we love him coming in, but these guys are just Jags. I think Jordyn Brooks is the best of the bunch there. So for those reasons, contract and what we saw this year, give me Jordyn Brooks.
Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. I think that Jordyn Brooks has the better upside. He's 2 years younger as well. EJ Speed, you have no idea where he's going to land. We've talked about Gus Bradley's defense being super profitable for linebackers, right? I mean, they play a ton of zone. Everything's in front of them. It's read, react, right? Jordyn Brooks also, I think the thing that goes a little bit under the radar sometimes is he's actually a pretty good pass rusher too at times. And when given that opportunity in the right defense, that's a repertoire to his game that he can really add in. And when you can start factoring that into the fact that, hey, this guy can consistently deliver me an 8-tackle floor and then has an upside of, adding in some sort of big play like a sack, 2-3 times throughout the season. Well, now you got a guy who can help you win a week consistently as well, help you be competitive while, winning weeks along the way. It's Jordyn Brooks hands down for me. Unless Speed ends up back in Indianapolis and it's Gus Bradley coming back, I just don't have the optimism for Speed to be that kind of guy to outvalue Jordyn Brooks moving forward.
Yeah, Brooks, LB 28 for Adam, EJ Speed, LB 46. So not even close. And I agree with Adam. I agree with you. Jordyn Brooks is the winner there. Speaking of the Colts, though, is Nick Cross still likely to be an elite DB option next year? Or should I sell for anything this offseason? Now, I think it is doubtful that he is an elite DB along the lines of what we saw this year, which was basically coming out of nowhere to be, a top 5 safety and a tackle monster for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't know how good Nick Cross is. I don't know. I think he's a lot better than I ever thought he was going to be. So I do have to give him his props there. But the main thing, Jake, you touched on is I think it's almost certainly, if I had to power rank the guys likely to get fired in Indianapolis, Gus Bradley is like 1, 2, 3, and 4 on that list. There's no way Gus Bradley makes it out of after week 18. I think he's gone probably that same day. If not on Black Monday when coaches typically get let go. We'll see about, I think Ballard is probably second on that list, followed by Steichen. But Gus Bradley is going to be gone. And this was just such a profitable scheme for that box safety, who was Nick Cross, who was Julian Blackmon before that. And so with him being gone, we just don't know what that's going to look like. And so I want to sell that uncertainty all day long. Now, don't just, go cash out for a 4th round pick or something. See if you can go get, dangle him out there. See if you can get, I don't know. I don't think you can get a 2nd. Can you get a 3rd for Nick Cross? And if I can get a 3rd, I'm probably cashing out. What about you, Jake?
Yeah. Oh, definitely at that rate. And and the biggest thing is right, Gus Bradley will get fired, right? But Shane Steichen will stay there. Not everyone's always as tapped into, right, when coordinator changes happen. And that's really the key here. Cover 3 is becoming a lot less prominent across the NFL, hence probably why Gus Bradley's defense struggled at times for a reason. That said, we don't know who's going to come in here. We don't know where Nick Cross is going to end up. I mean, he's still under his rookie contract and he's shown a little bit of promise here for us. Even if you look at his PFF grades, we've seen the improvement we'd like to see, in terms of, hey, he put up some really impressive, snap counts and he still managed to deliver very respectable grades. This is good. The guy can play consistent out in an NFL field. That doesn't mean that he's going to be in a scheme that's going to be very friendly to him, right? Because I I don't see him doing what he's doing without lining up in the box as heavy as he did moving forward. So I think you got to try and sell the name into production at this point. I agree with you. You don't want to just take anything. However, I think if you get, if you can find someone give you a third, maybe a third and a fourth or something like that, that's, to me, that's good enough. So,
yeah, I'd rather just take a fair deal than try to hold out for the king's ransom for Nick Cross and not capitalize on the value. I don't think you're going to necessarily regret not selling Nick Cross. I don't think he's going to crash and burn to the extent where like, I can't even play this guy, right? Like Minkah Fitzpatrick's a good example this year where it's like, God, I wish I had sold Minkah Fitzpatrick for anything last offseason because the dude was not even playable. I was picking up, who was it? Trayvon Merrick, I think, to start over Minkah Fitzpatrick. All year I was trying to find someone to replace that bum. But let's move to the next guy here on the list, and we can go through this one quickly. Myles Murphy. Can you get anything for Myles Murphy of the Cincinnati Bengals at this point, Jake? I think you're in unless you're in one of those leagues that's like 50-man rosters with a taxi squad, he's the very last spot on my taxi squad, if that. I think this dude is waiver wire fodder.
Yep. I mean, you nailed it. The guy hasn't had a massive amount of opportunities through his first 2 years. There's probably a reason for that. In the 600 snaps that he's had, he's produced 34 pressures. That's half of what maybe we'd like to see. No sacks at all this year. He did produce 3 last year. Maybe if there's some news where, they cut Hubbard and, Hendrickson's holding out or something for a contract or wanting a trade request, they're just like, hey, I got the last man standing in Cincinnati in the edge pool here. Jump in, come and get some of that. Like, you might have to do a little bit of a salesmanship yourself, but I don't think anyone's going to come asking for this. And if they are, you say, yes, please, and thank you, and move on. So,
yeah, the only silver lining might be the uncertainty surrounding both Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. Sam Hubbard, who was effectively benched for Joseph Osai down the stretch for Cincinnati. Trey Hendrickson still wanting to get paid. I believe they did a little bit of a hokey pokey kind of reshuffle with his deal. He didn't get the bag this offseason. I think they moved some money around, gave him some more money, something like that to kind of pacify him for 2024. But he's going to want to get paid. So what does that team do? They got to get T. Higgins paid, right? And so I don't know what this team does with those edge rushers. So that is that is like bullet point number 1 on the upside case for Myles Murphy. But this dude just hasn't shown anything. And so if you want to take a swing, if you want to just have someone's salary dump him onto your team, that's fine if you got a big old fat roster. Otherwise, just let this dude go. Next up, a guy I'm not letting go unless you're paying me a 2nd round pick, Jamien Sherwood, New York Jets linebacker revelation. This dude basically sent CJ Mosley to the bench and then to IR with the neck injury. Jake, I think that this dude, he's LB24 for Adam in the Dynasty rankings. I think Jamien Sherwood might be legit. I don't think you send a guy like CJ Mosley to the bench unless you have legit talent. And Adam said it, and it kind of caught me off guard when he said it originally. He said, I think even when CJ Mosley comes back, he's not getting that job back. This is Sherwood's job. Now, this team is going to have a new head coach, a new defensive coordinator. So what happens there? I think there are going to be so many needs to be addressed. I don't think Quincy Williams and Jamien Sherwood are in danger of losing their jobs. I think this dude is legit good. And I think he is an asset that I want to hold on to, unless someone wants to come and give me a 2nd round pick for him. What say you?
I think the biggest thing for me is going to be, where does he land, right? His rookie contract concludes here at the end of the 2024 season. And I agree with you. CJ Mosley probably ended up on IR from a neck injury from doing a double take, watching what Jamien Sherwood was doing out there. I mean, the guy just played out of his mind for us. He was just, you love to see this kind of come up for a guy. I mean, Quincy Williams did the same thing for the Jets, just several years back. So, but yeah, I just don't see how they don't find a way to bring back a young ascending talent like this. I get that Mosley and Quincy are in tough spots with some of their contracts, especially CJ Mosley. But if they can get through one more year with it, maybe they can get Sherwood on a little bit of a hometown discount because, hey, You only did it for 1 year for us, right? We're the team that bought into you. We brought you in. But if they can lock that guy up for the next 2-3 years, I mean, I'm not really overly concerned about who the coach is coming in, because worst case, he's LB2 on this team. And I mean, and that's absolute worst case. And, a second linebacker in most systems can still be very profitable, but I agree with you that, and you and Adam, that he's likely LB1 moving forward. So he gives them the best chance to succeed out there. And that's foolish for a team not to be doing that moving forward.
I didn't realize his rookie contract was expiring. It just seems like yesterday we were talking up this Jamien Sherwood guy coming into the draft. I think it was Joey the Tooth was a fan because he was this kind of safety. Remember, he came in as a safety. They still have him listed as a safety over on Spot Track. I was looking up his contract and it was like a safety linebacker hybrid. And we saw that, right? This guy finally make the move once CJ Mosley went down, and they bring this guy in, and he's a revelation. So I think even with the expiring contract, this is someone they'll look to bring back on the cheap. Will they be able to? Maybe not. There may be a team out there who wants to give this guy some money as a young ascending linebacker. Or he could, not have as many believers because he is kind of a convert. He's a guy moving over from safety to linebacker, and maybe that scares off GMs from giving him big money. And so he ends up back in New York. I'd like to see him there alongside Quincy Williams. I think that would be a fun linebacker duo. But let's keep rolling here. Calijah Kancey, is he a top 15 DL in Dynasty? Lots of upside, it seems. Jake, I'll let you start this one. Calijah Kancey, top 15 DL for you?
This is what I would have hoped for him last year coming out of the draft. I was a huge Calijah Kancey fan. I think probably everyone got tired of hearing, he looks just like Aaron Donald, right? This slim down interior defender with quick hands and quick feet. And that's not who he was coming out. I get some of the parallels, but the guy just knew how to win inside and generate pass rush with the best of them coming out of Pitt. Top 15 DL. I mean, he's definitely top 15, interior. Top 15 DL overall. I struggle to see that just because he hasn't done it for us consistently yet. And that's really the biggest sticking point for me, especially when you're talking about, talent this young. If I'm going to put you up at on that pedigree or that pedestal, you need to show me that, day in, day out that you're doing it. First of all, he hasn't been on the field consistently for us, right? Just shy of 500 snaps this year, 660 last year. But the nice thing is he's shown us consistent ability to generate pressure. He has been relatively productive, hyper productive in turning pressures into sacks. So he's doing all the right things. But then you also look at, he's left a lot on the bone in terms of run defense too, right? His missed tackle rate is not so great. So you're talking about maybe a lessened tackle floor. I think he's someone that you poke around if you're not the owner, right? You're poking around, seeing what he might be going for the other teams, because he had, a nice little strong end of the season here, sack in week 16, sack in week 17. Maybe they're willing to sell on him a little bit, but I struggle to put him that high this early just with what he's done so far.
Yeah, I think this is a big time. How is he designated in your league conversation? Because as Adam's IDL 1 overall, which is spicy, but Adam's rankings have always been very forward looking. We want to be ahead of the curve. We don't want to get caught flat footed and be crushed by the wave that's coming. And Jake, I agree with you. I wanted to see maybe a little more from Kancey. The tackles aren't there. We talked about, Nick Bosa averaging about 52 tackles per season the last 4 seasons. Calijah Kancey is averaging half that, 26 tackles. I did like the improvement, though. 4 sacks in 2023, 7.5 in 2024. So we are seeing improvement there. I think this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense is one that is going to be losing some key pieces in the future, mainly Levante David there. But I think this is a situation where you're looking at a future face of the defense. You've got a good defensive-minded head coach there in Todd Bowles. So this is definitely more speculative, right? This is a riskier call to say, yeah, I've got him as a top 15 DL. And I think that really breaks down to how you feel about the edge rushers, because I think, and how you feel about some of the D tackles as well, right? Are you still in on Big Q and Jeffrey Simmons? Do you still believe in Chris Jones? What do you do with DeForest Buckner? What do you do with Nnamdi Madubuike? Is he legit? So I think this conversation comes back to, how do you feel about edge rusher versus defensive tackle in leagues where those guys are combined under the DL label? How do you approach that? What's your outlook? And then how do you feel about some of these defensive tackles? But there's no denying that Calijah Kancey is a very exciting and up and coming IDP asset, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam's spot on, like, in the sense of where he can be. I need a little more to hop onto that bandwagon just yet, right? And like I said, I was a Kancey truther coming out. I was pumped. Him playing alongside Vita Vea. Yeah. I mean, that's one heck of a duo on that line. I mean, shoot, Vita Vea can make Joe Tryon-Shoyinka look good. So, I mean, now you got a real talent in
something.
Right now, you got someone in Kancey who can really do something with that. I love the path. I'm willing to buy in. I'm willing to go out and pay for him, but just at the right price, right? Like, we don't want, let's not get over our skis here too much.
I don't think Adam has him as a second round pick. I don't think you'd have to pay a second to go get this guy. Can I give a third and a fourth, to go get this guy? Unfortunately, a lot of the guys rostering Kancey know what they have. So I don't think you have a lot of kind of managers that aren't hip to what Kancey can be. Right. But I think it's worth going poking around and seeing what the price would be on Kancey. And maybe see if you can sell one of these older aging defensive tackles. Like, see if somebody will take, Chris Jones plus a third or something like that for a Calijah Kancey, right? See if you can get that young and up and coming defensive tackle for somebody who we probably have already seen the best of, like a Chris Jones. So have we seen the best from this last guy on the list? Jaelan Phillips, Jake. This one breaks my heart. What do you do with a soon-to-be 26-year-old coming off 2 serious season-ending injuries, Achilles and then ACL? It's a bummer. I think you can't see it in my shot, but if you watch our show, right over there on the wall is Jaelan Phillips' signed jersey. We love Jaelan Phillips. We don't love, though, his outlook as much after these 2 injuries. I think if you have him, you hold him, you hope for the best. If someone comes offering anything like a 4th round pick, that's probably too low. But nobody's going to pay you a third, though, for a guy coming off an ACL who is coming off an Achilles. I think you're just kind of stuck. We play buy, sell, hold a lot on our show, Jake. Mm-hmm. I think this is just a classic hold because nobody's going to give you anything. And yeah, maybe he comes back, and at this point, maybe he's 75 to 80% of what we know Jaelan Phillips to be. And that's still somewhat valuable, especially if you start multiple defensive linemen or multiple edge guys. But there are not a lot of bummers as big as the bummer is with Jaelan Phillips' outlook in Dynasty now.
Yeah, I mean, and the guy fought off a very serious, I think it was neck injury in college, right? That nearly ended his career. I mean, so you're talking 3 devastating injuries. So do you look at the narrative side of this and say, well, this guy's fought back through all kinds of adversity, so he can do it again? Or do you look at one point and say, at some point, someone's finally going to give up because they've been beat down that bad, right? And I'm not saying he's going to retire, right? That's not the route I'm going here with this, but it's just, or
is this guy a Joey Bosa who's just truly fits the label? And I don't know if I'm alone on this island, is just injury prone. Is this a guy who is just, for whatever reason, his body is prone to these kind of injuries, the way he plays, the speed, the violence, the torque? I mean, maybe his body is just built in such a way that it can't hold up to this kind of game. So I don't know. I don't see Jaelan Phillips as a guy that's ever going to give up. He got back so much faster from that Achilles injury than I ever thought he would. But you just start to worry. You're stacking some pretty big, serious injuries in here right in a row, and it's a little bit terrifying rostering this guy.
Yeah. And I think the fear is there. And so for me, again, in the right set of a roster construction or situation, I think I'm willing to go buy low. Like you said, a 4th is probably not going to get it done for some people, but maybe it does, right? You know what? if I got a deep enough roster, if I got the spot, I think I'm willing to do it. But really pay attention to this offseason, right? See what Miami does in free agency, right? Do they aggressively pursue edge rushers or help along that defensive line, even if it's rotational? Do they go out into the draft, and this is a pretty deep pass rushing class as well? Do they go out and pursue that as well? Let the Dolphins kind of indicate to us what they think of Jaelan Phillips' recovery and timetable, and let that kind of help indicate what we want to do with our rosters as well. Because at that point, they're holding all the cards in terms of information. We're just kind of speculating and trying to understand our own value. I believe in the talent that is Jaelan Phillips and what he's shown us out on the field. Even when he came back off this Achilles, I don't want to say quick, but he came back, slightly ahead of timetables. He looked good out there. Not like what we saw before the injury, but okay, well, let this guy get healthy throughout the year, get back up to game speed, game strength. We still got something here. So, and I don't know enough of, because it's not very common, ACL and Achilles injuries combined, right? Is there something to be said about same leg in the injury, different legs, right? How does that affect rehab and strengthening? So there's a lot of unknowns. So my biggest thing is I'm willing to take the shot, but pay attention to what the Dolphins do to help give us a little bit of information here as we move into the offseason.
Yeah, I've got a story pulled up here from 2022. Freshman year, sprained ankle, then a concussion, only played 6 games that season. Car accident in 2018, multiple operations. They removed multiple bones. They played through pain for the first 4 weeks before he suffered another concussion and was advised to retire at just 19 years old. And then, of course, we know about the Achilles and the ACL. So I hope we're not trending towards this just isn't meant to work out for Jaelan Phillips. But yeah, if someone's willing to, sell him to you for a 4th, or hell, just get him off my team sort of thing. Maybe you got him in an RSO league and you got to sign to a kind of a big deal. And it's I need the roster space and the cap space. I'll just dump him onto your team for nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. If I got the space in the cap, I wouldn't mind just taking a gamble, but it's hard. It's hard because this dude's fighting a really big uphill battle. So anyways, Jake, Dynasty discussion's done. Thank you all who sent in players, sort of situations, scenarios for us to kind of wade through there. That was a lot of fun. We gave you all a little bit of a week 17 and playoff recap, as well as some Dynasty conversations. We're going to be having a lot more of those here on the show in the coming weeks. Like I said, next week, I'll be back with Scott Soltis. We're recording here in the Sode Shack on Saturday, 2 days from today. That'll be out next week. IDP MVP, looking at the players that we loved rostering in 2024. And then Adam, Bobby, myself will be back in a couple weeks. So we are going to be moving for the first time in the history of this show to an every other week schedule in the off season. So we will be back the week of January 19th. I think it is. Yes, just the week of January 19th, after you hear the IDP MVP episode. But in those weeks where you do not hear us, the IDP after show will be recording. Jace will have some of the best guests on from across the IDP landscape. So no matter who you like, who you listen to, who you follow, they're going to be in that feed at some point this off season. And in terms of the coverage, we're going to have you covered. All the topics we hit in off seasons past will be split between the IDP show and the IDP after show. So even though we're moving to every other week, you are still going to be covered with our branch and our umbrella of shows that we have sprouted this season. Jake, I mentioned we'll have IDP drafts coming back. I know we'll have you on that program. So look forward to that firing up once the season is over into February, beginning of March. It's going to be a fun 2025 offseason. We're going to be talking rookies here soon, free agents. I love the season. I love having things to talk about, Jake. What's coming up right now, like February, March, April, may be my favorite time in the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think you guys always say it, right? It's not the off season, it's the on season, right? We're ready to go here. Absolutely. This is where you get the edge, right? I get a lot of people want to check out fantasy seasons can be long and all that stuff. But even if you just tune in once in a while, get a little bit of the information, see where things are trending and looking. Again, teams speak with their money and their actions all the time. Coach speak, we don't worry about. We want to see what they do with their pocketbooks and what's on the field. And and we'll use that to make some great decisions and get some edges here so we can bring home, another fantasy title next year.
Yeah, the path to another fantasy title, which we're talking about tonight, that starts in January, folks. That does not start in like July or August. So make sure you tune in. We're going to have you covered all on season. Like I said, next week, IDP MVP with Scott Soltis and about 20 to 25 different guests will be sending in their nominations. Jake will be listening to yours on there. I know. Look forward to seeing who you picked, who everyone else picked. And then we'll be back a couple weeks after that with a season recap. Like I mentioned, looking at the splits, beginning of the season, end of the season, who started slow and caught fire at the end of the season and vice versa. Who stayed hot the whole damn season? Who stayed cold the whole season for that matter? So check that out. That's going to be a fun episode. Myself, Adam, and Bobby back in the shack. And then we will be talking rookies after that. So look forward to it. And we've got a nice little surprise we're working on for you all with the rookie coverage. So a little special guest back on the show. So look forward to that. TheIDPshow.com. If you're one of those maniacs that has a Week 18 championship game, we've got you covered. All our regular content is on the website, TheIDPshow.com. The Sunday morning live stream, Jeff Pomazal will be back answering your lineup questions and any other questions you have. You got Dynasty questions? Get in there. Throw them at Jeff. He'll have you covered. And then if you'd like to do a roster eval, Jeff will be doing those this offseason for paid supporters. TheIDPshow.com, $5 a month. And Mike Woolert, Mike and I are talking right now to get some good content cranking on the website this offseason. So thank you all for checking out this episode. Jake, we were going to try to shoot for an hour. We went 90 minutes. That's just what happens when you get two guys on who love to talk ball.
Yes.
So thank you, my friend, again for coming on. We'll have you back on the show here soon and have you on IDP drafts as well. But thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for checking out this episode. Check out theidpshow.com and we'll be back next week talking MVPs. Until then, y'all take care and we'll see you soon.